we're going to go ahead and get started. I'm Kim Krause Schwalm, and I've been writing copy for major companies for probably 22 years. And before that, worked for one of the largest publishers at the time, Phillips Publishing, and helped launch their Healthy Direction supplement business. So I've been doing this for quite a while, mostly focusing on long form copy. And the last year or so, I've been pretty much sharing everything that I've learned, and not just stuff I've learned, by doing, but stuff I've learned the hard way on my own, and also things I've learned from working with some of the top copywriters. Early on, teaming up with people like the late Clayton Makepeace on some projects, and having some of my promos copy cheeked by Paris Lampropoulos. So I've learned a lot along the way, and I always continue to try to learn. And I think it's just something that as copywriters, we're naturally curious. We always want to find better ways to do things. And one of the things I've done recently that I've really been enjoying is launching a mentoring group called Fast Track to A-List. And Brian Sikansky is in that group. And I asked him to be with me today. He's going to be asking some questions as I go through my presentation. And I also, he'll keep an eye on the chat. You can see the chat, right, Brian?
Yeah, I can see it.
Okay. And when I share my screen, I have to do an extra step to actually see the chat. So Brian's going to keep an eye on the chat. And if there's any questions, I'll answer them along the way. And we'll try to keep it to no more than an hour. So without further ado, I would like to, let me just see what this is like if I just do it like this. Yeah, this is pretty good. Okay. Secret number one is research and prepare better than anyone else. And I assume everybody here who's on the call is already on my list. So you've probably heard me write about this again and again, but I really can't emphasize how important that whole research step is. Many of you probably have my Ultimate A-List Copywriters promo checklist. I mean, at least I hope you have it. I hope you've had a chance to use it. And if you look at that checklist, you'll see that I have a whole complete start kit checklist that I use whenever I start a new project with a client. And so I make sure that I get as many things that are on that checklist as possible. And that's what's going to help at least give me some kind of start with my research. But a lot of it is just through my own research, things that I do on my own. And sometimes I'm working with a brand new product. So there's not any market, any surveys, there's no customer testimonials, there's, not a whole lot, there's no track record or, things like that. So sometimes you're starting from scratch, but, the whole research process is really important. And if you also look at that checklist report that you got when you signed up for Copy Insiders, you will also find a research question list, which is extremely comprehensive. And those are all questions that you should be asking about your prospect. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that whole avatar research step in the next secret. But the key is to just go deeper. And one of the things that I always do whenever I can, and it's probably at least 99% of the time clients allow me to do it, is if there's a spokesperson or editor behind the product, let's say it's a newsletter, I interview them. I do a really deep dive discovery call, and I, prepare for that in advance with a whole list of questions. And, just if it's a formulator, if it's a supplement product, I also want to speak with the formulator. Why did you decide this ingredient? Why this particular form? What are some specific claims or studies or things that have been done? So those are all steps. The other thing I like to do is ask, what would I like to be able to say? And then I go find it. Brian, we've talked about this in some of our training. It's like, I'll never forget when I went to Gary Bencivenga's, he had a wonderful event like quite a while ago, 10, 15 years ago. And, he said that, he quoted some Oakland Raiders coach who would say, we don't take what the defense gives us, we take what we want. And so I always think about that when it comes to writing copy. I'm not going to just take what the client gives me. I'm going to go out and find what I want, right? What I'd like to be able to say, And we'll talk a little more about that too, about how that you can tie that in to be able to support a big idea that might seem completely unrelated to the product. So, you know,
So how do,
and
how do you, how do you kind of think about that? Like your research process, you have all this information, but I think for a lot of copywriters, it's a little overwhelming. You know, they don't really know that first step or like where to begin. Like what's important to you, especially as you kind of kick off your research and as you kind of bring together that information.
so a lot of what I write are supplements, right? Supplement copy. So, you know, I want to go and dig out the information about the different ingredients, like what are the very best studies. I want to look at the full text studies because that's where you're going to really find the detail, like something, you know, does 100 times better job of protecting cells, you know, like I did recently with an immune product. Um, so that you have to know where to go to find that kind of research. Um, hey, everybody should be muting themselves just to, you know, unless you have a question, you can just put that in the chat. Um, so, you know, you have to zero in on what do you think is going to be most important, right? So what you're trying to do is differentiate your product. Like, what is that story? What is that unique mechanism? So what are the things that are going to lead to digging that out? And so I'll start with some ingredient research, but a lot of it comes from interviewing the formulator or finding out it's a branded type of ingredient. Like, why is that branded and what, you know, what's unique about that and how is that different from like, you know, other stuff that's on the market. So that's just one example. But I understand what you're saying about it can feel kind of overwhelming. And that's one of the reasons why I try to give, you know, people who work with me or in my training, like, you know, more of a structure, you know, to use. And that checklist that you got, you know, in the ultimate A-list copywriters checklist is going to be really helpful to help focus you on that.
How much are you looking at? Like, what are you know, competitor supplement promos? Like, what are they look like? Are you constantly looking at what the rest of the market is saying and how you can differentiate that? I mean, how much do you spend time on doing that?
When I was starting out more, I spent a lot of times like collecting. I mean, I still collect a lot of promos, but really studying them. I mean, I do that to some degree, but I don't have to rely to it as much, you know. But yeah, I think it's important to see like what kind of angles and messages are working. And it can sometimes give you some ideas for something you might want to try with your product. But early on, I used to study them more from the standpoint of how are they structured and how did they, you know, how did they do it? Because I really didn't have anybody teach me, you know, how to do it. So I was really trying to figure it out on my own.
Gotcha. And then in terms of like getting into your, you know, you know, like the end reader's head, like, you know, how do you, I know you in your checklist, you talk about how you like to interview those customers if you can, but like, what else do you do to kind of get into their framework of how they're thinking about it and kind of tying in your research to that?
Well, definitely if you can actually talk to previous buyers of the product, and not all clients will let you do that, but when I have done that, that's really paid off because I just know exactly who I'm talking to and I can picture that person, you know, when I sit down to write. But you know, other ways can be helpful too. Like when I was writing my sinus supplement control, you know, I don't have any sinus issues. There's really nobody in my house that has sinus issues. So I didn't really know, well, what is this like? What are they dealing with? And so for something like that, I found going into forums, you know, and there's a million different forums out there for people with any health problem under the sun. I found that incredibly helpful. And then you can really pick up on the words they use to describe the problem. And so, yeah, I would definitely recommend going into forums that are specific to that, you know, problem area.
Gotcha. And then I think you talked about in your email today about how you're trying to find those connection points, like as you're doing your research and maybe outside of, you know, some of the stuff that's out there, like how do you start formulating some of those connection points as well about kind of feeding into that a little bit?
So, you know, we're so lucky that we're writing copy in this day and age when we have Google. And, you know, it's like when we had that call with Dan Ferrari the other day, you know, on our group mentoring call, he was talking about how he got a big idea or the big idea for his Genesis anti-aging supplement promo by coming. He actually knew in his head that a lot of people in the tech industry were doing some interesting things in the anti-aging space. So instead of just Googling like the ingredients in his supplement or whatever, he was looking more tangentially at like what are some different related topics or maybe not so obviously related topics. So by doing that and looking up, tech industry, anti-aging, and just seeing where in that rabbit hole he went down, like where that took him, he stumbled across this article in a New Yorker magazine, and it was describing, this actual event where a Yale PhD expert, spoke, and it was all these, household name, Hollywood stars and tech executives there. And there you go. He had his whole lead. He had his whole hook right there. It also reminds me of when I was writing an anti-aging supplement for New Market Health, which was one of the Agora companies a few years ago, and decided to take, I felt like the whole telomere story had been told a million times, which is kind of what, in Dan's promo, he took kind of a different tack to get around that as well, to make it, to make it seem fresh and new. And so one of the things I do is I will start to Google just sort of some more general topics or that are sort of related, but not the exact related topic. And that's how I came across the story of Mark, why am I blanking on his last name, but he's the famous astronaut who has a twin brother who's an astronaut. And Mark went up to space for a year, but he did these different things that basically increased the SERT hormone in his body. And so when he came back to Earth, he looked a lot younger. He had, they were amazed at how little he had aged, whereas his brother over the year had aged. So I was able to take that story and make that my main hook, and use that in the lead and get a control out of that. So those are the kinds of things that you start to kind of get an idea that might seem really kind of out there. Like it was a little challenging to say, how do I exactly tie this in with the product? But I found a way. So that's what I mean by kind of, you find something that's tangentially related and then you retrofit it, and that's where then you get really focused with your research. It's like, okay, so how does SERT hormone really work, and oh wait, okay, and that's exactly how this one ingredient works. So now I can say this is mimicking, what this, it gets a little sciencey, but you have to be willing to put that extra work in, and then that's how you you make those connections.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we talk about a lot is like when do you kind of come up with that headline and lead in your research? Is it something that you start with, or is it just a direct result of your research? And how do you kind of come to that? And where does that fit into the process of what you kind of think about?
So what I like to do is I get all my research done, and we're going to go to the next step because I'm going to talk a little bit more because this is still really part of the whole research phase. And once I've got all that together, I like to start writing, and I like to just let it flow. And I'm going to get into this a little bit more. And so, yeah, I will usually have like a headline, right? And I try not to get too attached to it because I'm probably going to come up with something even better, In fact, usually the best headline isn't going to be probably till the very end. And then I'll say, well, I got like a buried headline here. Maybe that's a better headline. But I will at least get a working headline going. I will get the lead going. And then I just start writing. And sometimes then I start in the middle. Sometimes the important thing is just to let it flow. And one of my favorite things is when it's just all really fresh in my mind is I'll just say it out loud. I mean, I can record it and transcribe it later, or I'm just letting it free flow on the keyboard and I just let it flow out of me. And so it's really important to allow yourself to do that. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later.
Okay. Yeah. So maybe dive into kind of, like Prism. What does that exercise mean to you? And how do you kind of, how do you get to that point where you're able to kind of free flow a little bit more using kind of this as a foundation?
Yeah. So that's why you really can't just go right from here to, step 3. Step 2, which is something in my mentoring group we've probably spent the last month or so on, is really digging deep into your product and your market. And by market, I'm really meaning more like your target customer, your avatar. And one of the things we do is we do a Prism exercise. And I actually picked that up from Clayton Makepeace. And what you do, it goes beyond just, there's all those research questions that you'll find in the copy checklist that are really good for getting you thinking about who is this that you're writing to. But once you have to do that step first, but then once you've kind of got a better idea of who this person is, then you start to list out, like, what does my prospect want? Like, what are all those deepest wants and desires? What does my prospect fear? And listing each of those out. what does my prospect believe? What kind of belief system? I've tried certain things and it hasn't worked, or this is because of my, heredity, or this is inevitable as I get older, or whatever. Like, what are all these different beliefs? And some of those could actually be objections and barriers to buying. And then what does my prospect enjoy? And this ties into maybe some of their deepest desires, but also some of those emotional motivations that we don't always, think about, or what maybe your prospect wouldn't even necessarily consciously tell you or be willing to tell you. Things like, somebody who is in business for themselves, wants to be seen as being successful. There's a lot of pride. There's a lot of other things that are drivers. It's not just, I want to make money and put bread on the table for my family. It's, so what are the things that your prospect enjoys? And so once you've done all those things, you put together a concise sketch. And this is kind of what you call the prism. It's like looking through a, kaleidoscope, and you're seeing, you're just kind of drilling down, right? And then you're going to put together like a 5-sentence, summary of who exactly this person is. And then that's the part in terms of really digging deep into your market or your, avatar. The other part is then digging deep into your product. And again, you can apply this to any kind of product or service that you're selling. So you list out the features, and everybody knows about features and benefits. And the feature is something your product does, right? And then the benefit is so you can. But the 5-step exercise takes it a lot deeper. So the feature is, let's say, it includes melatonin, right? Maybe let's say it's a sleep supplement. I'm just making something up. Why? Well, melatonin, resets your body clock so that it's, acting the way it should. I don't know, I'm just kind of making something up, right? So the third step, so there's 2 steps already, feature and why that feature, right? And then the third one is the benefit, like turning that feature into benefit, so it's, so you can, sleep all night and, not have to, wake up in the middle of the night, or, be able to fall asleep quickly. And then the fourth one that a lot of people don't always take is then dimensionalizing that benefit. So what impact does that benefit have on your prospect's life? Like, how do you paint pictures, word pictures of what life will be like when they have that benefit? So you'll be sleeping peacefully through the night and waking more rested and energized and productive and ready to take on the day. And you'll be tackling projects. You'll have plenty of energy, more sluggish feeling at 3 p.m., et cetera, et cetera. So, you start just listing out and dimensionalizing all the different ways that prospect will benefit. And then the 5th step is then tying those dimensionalized benefits to the dominant emotion that the prospect associates with each of those dimensionalized benefits. So you'll be feeling, proud of how much you've accomplished. You'll be feeling, happy that, you're, looking forward to each day, or whatever it is. So you'll have each of those dominant emotions associated with those benefits. By the time you've written out, and this can be like 2-3 pages of stuff, you've actually written a lot of your copy, and some of this I would encourage, putting it into prospect's own words. And this is going to come through step 1. If you've been going on to forums and creeping around, listening to people talk about their sinus problems and how they describe it, like I did, you're going to be able to then put it in their own words, and you're going to have a good idea of, how they would say it.
We just go back to like dimensionalizing, like how do you, like how, you do it very well in your promos. Like, how do you kind of tap into those kind of things that maybe your prospect wasn't even aware of that your product can provide, and kind of those benefits of the benefits that you kind of bring forward? Like, how do you kind of tap into that at a kind of deeper level to kind of get into their head a little bit more?
So you're talking about like, how do I determine how it goes from benefit to dimensionalized benefit?
Yeah, like what's that process, especially as kind of copywriters think about it, like bringing it to life a little bit more for their audience? Like, how do you think about doing that? And
so it's thinking beyond like that immediate, like, what's that initial benefit related to that feature, and then like, what is that like? And part of it is really understanding like, what are the frustrations and fears and issues that your prospect's dealing with, associated with that particular problem. Let's say it's sleep, or if it's sinuses, right? What are those specific problems? And then taking it a step further and how that makes their life better. It's almost like, if you don't have that problem in your life anymore, what are you able to do? It's solving this particular problem. So now what does life look like? So it's kind of taking it one step removed from that.
I think the other thing I've heard is once they've kind of solved their problem, they start worrying about those next problems that they're going to have as well. So how do you kind of account for that? Like those.
I don't think I've heard that. Again, and you try not to introduce new things to worry about, right? If anything, what I love to do is always introduce other side benefits, that they'll get with the product. So once you solve this problem, guess what? It's also, you're not just sleeping better. Now you have you're thinking more clearly. Your memory improves or whatever. That would be like maybe side benefits of solving the problem. But a lot of times the supplements that I'm selling, I mean, they have multiple benefits. Like my Circo 2 product, which is one of the promos that is doing really well right now. And I wrote it like 3 years ago, and we're going to be talking about it in depth in my Copy Teardown Masterclass. But that one it does everything from circulation to improving memory to improving sexual performance to, helping you walk further. And then we recently have uncovered that, hey, it's also got these incredible immune and lung health benefits, which, happen to be very timely now. So, you might hook somebody in with a memory, hook or, improve circulation. And then, but hey, guess what, guys, this is going to help you in the bedroom, and it's going to help you with this. It's going to help you with that. It's like one of my original clients when I first started writing supplement promos was like, you think you can work a sex side benefit in there? It always seemed to give it a little bit of a boost, so to speak. So yeah, I like to work in more things, more benefits, and I don't really see that as an issue. It's not one that I've encountered.
What about in the financial space as well? Like how do you think about those benefits and kind of working them in in some of your financial promos?
How do I work in what the
those side benefits as part of your financial promos and kind of the same aspect?
I think with financial, it's a lot more direct. I mean, it's basically make more money, but it depends on the type of product. Like if it's one of my early controls for a product called Personal Finance, it was a much broader type investment newsletter. So there, like I might hook them in with, hey, real assets is where you want to be, and gold is where it's at, and gas, oil, and all this stuff. But that would be kind of like the lead story. But then I would branch it out to, but you also want to be in small cap because blah blah blah, or maybe you also want to have bonds. So because everybody wants to have a more diversified portfolio in general. So that would be one way of branching into different side benefits. But in general, like I just have a promo that I wrote with another copywriter that's going to be finally going live next week, very focused on income investing. And so, that one we're keeping pretty tied to that. I mean, but then there's like the dimensionalization is, look, this is going to help keep you retired. And it's like, you don't have to dip into your, 401k and all this other stuff. And it's, it's also, you're giving you long-term growth in addition to income now. So, it's usually not just the one key benefit, but some promos you want to stay more focused than others.
Okay.
Okay, well, let's keep it moving here. Secret number 3. All right. So now that you've probably spent, and I would say it's at least 60 to 70% of the process for steps 1 and 2, or secrets 1 and 2. Now you're ready to write. And I would suggest write fast, write like you're on a tight schedule, procrastinate if necessary. And I have definitely found myself in this boat before, starting a project, because I usually book out, months in advance, oh my God, I'm like 2 weeks behind starting this thing and and I researched like crazy for like a week. And I've actually then written the promo, like sometimes in just 5 days or less, like the whole, when I'm talking like these are 30 to 40 pages of copy, on a Word doc that I'm turning in. And I find that when I've written fast like that on a tight schedule, that I usually end up writing a better, tighter, more successful promo. The times sometimes where you've got all the time in the world and then it's like dragging on, or when you start something and then you leave and you have to come back like a month later and get back into it or whatever it is, it's really hard, especially because you've got this momentum now, everything's fresh in your mind, your avatar, your product, everything else. I would just say write fast, and there's some strategies like, like we were just talking about, like, You could try just saying it out loud and record it, or, and then transcribe it, or you can just, let it flow out. And in fact, I'm going to just jump to secret number 4, because that's basically what it is. It's just let the copy flow out of you, don't over edit, take breaks. I was thinking about what I wanted to say on this call. I just decided to do this call the other day. And yesterday I was like, I've been so busy with a million other things. I went to take the dog out for a walk in the woods. Thank God I have these woods behind our house. It's been great to escape to. And it was like this whole presentation just like went into my head. Like there it was. And I was like, shoot, I didn't bring my phone. I just like came back to the house and just jotted it all down. I can't tell you how many times that has happened over the years when I've been writing copy. And it's exactly what Gene Schwartz said in his lecture, many years ago. But, I think a lot of people have heard about set the clock for 33 minutes and 33 seconds. I don't actually do that, but I do make sure I get up, I go brush my teeth, I go get more coffee, I go outside, take a walk. And that's when all the connections happen, right? Things come together, you get an idea. Showering, oh my God, showering's amazing. I can't tell you how many times I've just run out of the shower with my towel and just, oh my God, I gotta rip this one down. But yeah, so you gotta just let the copy flow out of you. Do it while you've got that momentum going. Don't try to over edit. Take lots of breaks. The other thing that I wanted to suggest potentially is there's this book that I have on my bookshelf called Writing with Power by Peter Elbow. And if you've never read it, it is just such a great book about the writing process, getting started, how to edit yourself, when not to edit yourself, which I would say in the very beginning, don't try to write everything perfectly. It's like, as a book I read not that long ago, now I'm blanking on the name, but like, get your shitty first draft done, and just while it's all fresh, and then you can go back and edit.
So in those times where might have a little bit of writer's block, like what else do you how do you get out of that where the copy just isn't flowing, it isn't coming out the way you want it to? Like what else have you
So I'll write something very simple, like I'll just write the order page, right? Which sometimes that is a good thing to do at the beginning anyway, because it just makes the offer very concrete, and it makes you think, oh yeah, we were going to have bonuses or their premiums, or, is there some different ways to dimensionalize this guarantee or offer? So it just gets you kind of thinking like that. And sometimes if it's a very offer-oriented promotion, which is not generally what I do. Generally what I'm doing is more acquiring new customers, but when I would do a lot of back-end stuff, sometimes it was just strictly very offer-driven. And so that's just a great place to start, is write that order form, write that order page, put together the testimonials, do testimonial sidebars, and also that gets you excited too. It's like, wow, they got some great stories here. Wait, maybe one of these could be my lead, or, so I would say start with things that are easy. You feel like you're making some progress, you're getting momentum, and start there.
Okay. And as this copy is flowing out of you, do you think about, like how it's structured at all, or do you have an outline that you go through? How do you think about that?
Sometimes I do have a rough outline. I think that that's really helpful for people who are just kind of starting out and new to long form copy. I think it's good to think about, and there's a lot of outlines out there. You can find one that you think seems like a good one to use and start with it. But, it's probably going to change. I don't feel that you have to stick with that exactly. Like for me, almost every promo is kind of organic, and they're all a little bit different. If you look at like a bunch of really successful long-running controls, there's certainly some things that are similar, in terms of structure, but there's a lot of variations too. So you got to think what's best for your message and your approach and your product. But yeah, I would say as part of the process, and this is what we're doing too in our group, is once we get to this point and we've got some copy platform ideas, there is a rough outline that I think you want to start with and then go from there. Yeah. Don't feel like you have to stick to it.
And then in terms of like the copy that you're just letting flow out of you, like how, as you go through and get closer to that final product, how do you start redlining that and taking out the portions that, make sense to keep in and take out, and how do you be a little bit more strategic about, getting down into like, forming that promo, which might be 30, 40 pages at the end of it?
Well, that's where I get here. So there's a lot of reading through. One thing I always do, and I'm sure most people do this, is you check the grade level, make sure it's, you know, 8th grade or below, ideally further below. Sometimes it's challenging, you know, if you're writing supplement copy, because there's going to be always be some big bit words in there that are bumping up the grade level a little bit. Um, you know, and it's the other thing that I do is I never turn it in until I've put it aside for at least a day or two, whenever possible. I know that's hard because if you procrastinated and you only wrote the darn thing in like 5 days, it's like you just want to turn it in. Like you're just like, oh my God, I can't think about this anymore. I want to turn it in. But the best thing to do is just sleep on it at night, look at it in the morning with fresh eyes, and then send it out. And when I can't edit it any further, you know, and so if I look at it with my fresh eyes and I'm seeing, you know what, I've got some really long paragraphs and some long sentences, and I got this and that, and there's, or maybe that's not flowing right or whatever, I'll put it aside again for a period of time. And maybe it's just for a few hours or something. And then I'll come back to it again. And then when I can no longer edit anything else, that's when I turn it in. And that is the ideal situation. But, you know, the secret here is don't settle, you know, don't settle for mediocrity. And, you know, there's a lot of people out there like, well, you know, it just needs to be good enough copy, right? And sometimes maybe there's some truth to that. But when you're writing in really competitive, saturated markets, like most of us are, I mean, let's face it, there's a million other people with weight loss programs or coaching programs or financial newsletters or, you know, immune supplements or whatever. You know, you've really got to be able to stand out. You've really got to be able to differentiate your product and have the right messaging. And so, you know, the real needle mover is copy. You know, with all things, you know, all things being equal, most of the time you're writing for companies, unless it's a complete startup, that, you know, they've already nailed down, you know, the 40-40-20 rule is like 40% is the list. So they already know, you know, we know who to go to on Facebook, for example. You know, we sell a lot of things on Facebook, and, you know, we've marketed this product before. So, you know, or if it's direct mail, or if it's an online, you know, house email list or whatever it is, like, you know, that list, you know, 40% of your success hinges on, is that the right list, right? Is that a good list? Is it, you know, are you going to the right market? Which you can't really control as a copywriter. The other 40% is the offer. And the offer isn't just take $200 off or, you know, get this free premium, but it also includes the actual product. So assuming it's a product that's been sold successfully before, you know, that's not that much of a variable either. So the other variable really here, the one that you probably have the most control over as a copywriter, is the 20%, which is creative. And that includes both copy and design. So design is also an important aspect, but copy is probably, you know, definitely more important, especially with the kind of long copy that we do as copywriters, a lot of us. And that's where you can really get the results. So if you're just, you could be good enough to maybe get the control or create, if it doesn't, there's no existing control. Like if it's a new launch, you could create a promo that's going to do decent, you know, just good enough. But if you really want to create a promo that's going to go up against and beat other controls and be running for, you know, 8 or 10 years, you know, you've got to make the most of that 20%. And that's really where you can have an impact.
Can we go back to kind of getting the grade level down a little bit, especially in kind of those supplement promos where there's a lot of you know, scientific information and stuff like that that is not, you know, it's too complicated for your audience. Like how do you kind of you know, transition some of that stuff to some of the words that your audience really understands or can associate with?
Well, that's definitely a challenge. What I do is, again, I make use of Professor Google whenever possible. And you know, I Google, what is it I want to know? Like I gave an example earlier this week in an email where I was talking about being able to make that 100 times more infected cells. Of course, I couldn't say infected cells. I had to say invaded cells claim about SARS-CoV-2. And it was only by going through the full text study and getting through 500, like, you know, mind numbing, you know, words. And I finally saw something about a log2, and I'm like, what the hell is that? You know, I even have a degree in math and stats. I'm like, I don't know what that is. And so I Googled, what is log2, or what is whatever the phrase was. And then it took me right to this very simplified website that told me log2 means 100 times. and log 300 times or whatever it was. And I'm like, whoa, this is so valuable. So, sometimes you hit the jackpot like that by just knowing how to, I've done that so many times, like with my memory supplement control, which ran for like 8 years and might actually potentially be revived again. I hope. When I'm digging into the studies, and again, I'm looking at the full text study whenever possible, because it's telling me, okay, so they gave these people, this, whatever the name of the test is, it's some standard type test, for measuring their memory. I will Google what is that test, and then I will like find out, like, so they had them, they read off a series of numbers that they had to repeat back. So now I've got like the story aspect of my study, and I've made it more concrete and understandable and actually kind of exciting. And I've dimensionalized the study to really show the result. So those are the kinds of things that I dig in and find. The other thing that I've done is like Khan Academy, and there's like science for middle schoolers. Like there's so many sites out there that I've gone to just like, what in the hell is this inflammation stuff, right? Or these, inflammation is like really complicated. So I'll just look at that and see how they explain it to 8th graders. And I'm like, perfect. Now I understand it. Now I know what words to use to explain it. So there's a lot of different shortcuts like that you can use.
Then from a compliance side, like when do you, are you always keeping that in account and kind of knowing what words you can use, or how do you kind of think of that, about that as part of your process?
Well, I've been writing supplement copy or selling supplements, like, believe it or not, since the early 90s. So when I was running the Healthy Directions business, so it's pretty much embedded in my head. But you basically can't use any disease names in general. You can't make a specific disease or drug-like claim for a product. So it's always about, like, I think system function, structure function type claims. Now, if it helps, like in your first draft or so, just write it out the way you want to write it out, and they can always, because you don't want it to hold you back, right? But then you can go back and edit later. It's like, well, I can't say it, it decreased blood sugar levels, but actually, you can say things like blood sugar levels drop. It all depends on your client too. There's ways to get around, like you can't say it cures hypertension, but you can say, blood pressure levels, drop, 48%, right? So it's a fine line. You can't say things like, end diabetes naturally. And again, I'm talking about supplement promos. If you are writing for an information product, you can say all of those things, because of First Amendment.
Okay.
Okay. Any other questions on this, Brian?
How much do you, and I know sometimes you kind of put, do you ever have somebody else take a look at, one of your drafts or things like that to get feedback? Like how do you think about, putting somebody else's fresh eyes in terms of something that you're writing?
That's a great question. Actually, I do have this woman that is a friend of mine, and she calls herself a copy therapist. And she actually knows quite a lot about copy, even though she's technically a psychologist, trained psychologist. And now she's like a book editor. And she's also the perfect avatar for a lot of the products I sell, because she's like I think a 65-year-old woman. And so, yeah, I'll run it by her, and she just loves reading the copy, and she'll tell me, this hit me weird, or this didn't really make sense, or I got confused here. So I think if you can find somebody like that who's kind of close to being your avatar, who is really willing to read the copy and give it those fresh eyes, I think that's a huge advantage. She's even given me some things like one of the memory promo control headlines. And it's funny because I had to kind of sell my client on testing it. And it was something about, spacey and forgetful, and putting that word spacey, which we didn't normally associate with it, but she was like, oh yeah, my friends and I say that all the time about feeling spacey and, being forgetful. So I put that in the headline, and that became the new control. And so, yeah, so there's a lot of advantages to running it by somebody, particularly if they're your avatar. Yeah. And if you can obviously, if you have someone who's copy chiefing you, or willing to copy chief you, if you're just starting out, or if you're in some kind of, mentoring program where you're getting, your eyes, somebody more experienced getting their eyes on your copy, obviously that's going to be huge for you as well.
And in terms of like like how do you think about like headline options and things like that when you go to the actual client? How do you, what do you present to them? Do you give them multiple leads? Do you give them multiple headline options? Like how do you
Yeah,
present?
absolutely. I that's looking at the side of my head. So what I do is I always give them for my headlines, I usually do at least 5 minimum. And these are like my boiled down very best ones. I usually have come up with like 10 or 20 or 30 or, just whatever I come up with during the brainstorming process. And then you start piecing together, taking out what you like and mixing them up. And then again, at the end stage where you're reading through, you're like, wow, that could actually be a headline, or, this and that could be a headline. You're getting different ideas there. So yeah, I give them like at least 5 or more of my very best headline options. And I'll usually indicate which one I like the best. And then same thing with writing the emails that drive traffic to the sales page. I will do at least a couple different email versions. And then for each one, I'll do at least 5 or 6 different subject line options at a minimum.
And maybe like the current environment. I mean, how I guess have you adapted any of your copy to the current environment that we're in, or kind of thought about any of the controls that you've had? Like, how do you bring out certain angles? Like, have you kind of changed your mindset at all just because everybody's kind of at home and kind of the world has changed a little bit? Like, how have you thought about your copy, right now versus kind of a more evergreen type of approach?
That's a really good question. Well, I mean, it's been more. For some of the supplement controls that I have, the mindset is everybody's thinking about ways to boost their immune function. And at least that was true as of a month ago, but I think it's still true now. So, I have gone back with a few of my current controls, the Circo 2, the sinus supplement. And these are all ones that I'll be going deep into on my Copy Teardown Masterclass. So those we've done some tweaking with some new headline tests, and actually getting ready to do a direct mail test, and potentially changing the sales pages as well. So, and that's working really well. It's getting a nice lift by bringing out some of these benefits that we really didn't focus on because they weren't as hot button type issues for people. For the financial promo that we're going to be running, or my client will finally be running this coming week, we ran into some issues with that because obviously it's supposed to hit like right before all the coronavirus stuff hit, and the markets just were in turmoil. And being an income investing newsletter, there was a lot of them canceled the dividends they were going to pay, for the companies that were our top picks. I mean, it was just a big mess. So we had to kind of wait for a lot of stuff to get sorted, and then there was like some major revising. And but in that case, it's interesting. I've been hearing from other people who write a lot in the financial market that the pure greed promos are actually doing really well. And it could just be that people feel a little desperate. They just watched their investment plan, drop like 20%, and they're like, holy crap, how am I going to make this up? So the greed messages are working well. And this promo, as it turns out, I mean, we wrote it like originally a few months back before all this, it's very greed oriented, really focusing on these really fat dividends. So, I'm hopeful it's going to do well. And I think that kind of messaging, but at the same time, there were certain things we had to work in just about, look, these are really solid plays. And these are ones that we know they're not going to be cutting their dividends, because again, if these people are doing it kind of invest, they just saw a whole wave of that. So there were certain possible objections we had to kind of work in to address in the copy.
Yeah, maybe 2 objections. Like, how do you think about working in those things or hesitations that you hear from your audience? Like, how do you kind of fit that into your overall outline, but also kind of your promo, and how do you kind of address, where do you address those, and how do you kind of think about kind of knocking those down?
So a good place to do that, I mean, it's not the only place you can do it, but a good place to do that is when you start to get into your close copy. You can do it there. You can do it in your problem setup, depending on what it is. Like, you could acknowledge that maybe let's say you were selling a supplement that had melatonin, since we talked about that earlier. You could say, maybe you've tried melatonin before, but it didn't work for you, but there's a reason why. I'll get to that in a moment. And maybe that's part of your, part of your mechanism is like you've got a special form of melatonin, or maybe you've got it combined with another nutrient that, does, makes it work better, or whatever it is. So that could be, you could kind of foresee that they might have an objection maybe once you reveal a certain ingredient. You could also do it in FAQs, which is a very effective way to do it, frequently asked questions. And you can work those in at the very end of your sales page. Or, like when I've done have my promos, be direct mail promos, I can have a whole, sidebar that's just frequently asked questions. And those are strategically chosen, no matter whether it's online or offline, which ones are going to highlight like really what's great about this product. What are the ones that are going to overcome, common objections, and then you always end with one that tells them exactly what to do next and how to get it. And so that can be a very good place to do it.
Okay. I guess the other thing that comes to mind is like, whoever your guru is, or whoever, is kind of the person behind that, how do you kind of think about their story and kind of molding it to, the lead that you have, and kind of the overall flow, and kind of writing that out?
You talking about with the guru, how do I work their story in?
Yeah, I mean, how do you kind of present them as an authority, as somebody to listen to, but also kind of weaving it into, the copy before it, and the copy after it?
So, I mean, a lot of that comes out in the discovery call, like when I'm interviewing them and I'm finding out, and I'll do my own research too. Like, oh my gosh, they've been interviewed on CBS and Wall Street Journal or whatever, so I'll kind of work some of the credibility boosters in. And I find out like, well, sometimes I'll even ask them, well, why should someone listen to you about income investing? I think we asked that of the guru for, this income newsletter. And, because he's worked with, the big Wall Street firms, he's seen it from the inside. He knows how to evaluate these companies. He knows about the investments that usually just hedge fund managers get, or, however. So you start to bring some of that story in. Same thing with a doctor, and so, I mean, I've had doctor spokespeople who aren't always really hugely impressive, or maybe they're not even MDs, but, then you start talking about, how they've worked with patients and how many patients they've worked with, or, that kind of thing. They start to, they start to feel more comfortable about, okay, this is somebody that I can listen to, and of course, yeah, you're going to look for all those credibility boosters, that they've written books, that they've done these things, media appearances, whatever. And that's part of that whole start kit and that whole research process.
Yeah, I think
anything else on that? We're going to go to, we got one more secret, which again, I mentioned earlier. This is how I got started, was just getting on as many mailing lists as possible, and, collecting these, promos that I would see again and again. And I still have like, all sorts of file drawers full of them. I've got them literally stacked in my office all over the place. And it's, it's a great way to start to understand. And I know that there's entire courses like Copy Hour, which I've never done, was not around when I was starting out, but you can do it on your own, where you just take a promo that you keep getting or you see online and just write it out by hand. And I know there's a lot of, Brian, is that something you've ever done?
Yeah, so I took Copy Hour, and I kind of went through, kind of copying it out and things. That I don't do it as much now.
Right.
We've probably gone, it would be, I guess it would be helpful, like if somebody's getting these controls, like how would you suggest kind of thinking about breaking down some of the mechanisms that they're using and things like that? Like,
well, so I've actually mentored people, and also just people who I haven't mentored but have told me, they'll take, like, say some of my successful promos, and they'll just like pull out like, how am I structuring it? And they'll create their own little outlines, for example. And, you can do it that way, where you're just kind of analyzing it almost line by line, like, here's what's happening here, here's what happening here, So you can do those things on your own, where you're, saying, what I mean? And the more you understand about copywriting and different strategies and tactics, the more then you can understand, okay, now I get why they did it that way, or, because it's not always done exactly the same way. Like in my copy teardown class, on the Circo 2, I'm actually, I've already included all, the training for that week 1 module. And, one of the first steps for me was looking at, they actually had two current controls at the time. So just going through and analyzing those. And so even though I didn't write those promos, I was able to look at them and say, okay, they're doing this. Now, okay, I see they decided to introduce the mechanism here. And oh, wait, but they, they're introducing the product at this point and blah, blah, blah. And just, putting together like, okay, here's how they decided to do it and kind of understanding why. And then what I ended up doing was taking a different approach with mine and then ending up beating them. And then I've had the control, for the last 3 years. So knock on wood, it's still going very strong. So, those are the things that as you learn more about copywriting and you get used to studying controls, you can start to see that, and especially as you get more experience. And that's one of the things I'm just so excited about with this program. And I have the URL here is, ever since I started writing like copy insiders and sending emails to my list, people have been like saying, I'd really love to see you break down your promos. And like when I put on my copywriting velocity event last year, that was something I got a chance to do. And people were like, wow, this is really valuable. So, I'll be able to just go really deep. I am going really deep into each of these promos and then putting together a whole list of like takeaways that you can then apply to other promos that you write. So I think it's just a really valuable way to learn, and it's different. It's a good adjunct to other copywriting training courses. I mean, the ones that I've created, but other people out there have, because you still have to understand the basics of what's a headline and what goes into a headline and how do you write a fascination and all those different things, and how do you create like a structure for organizing your copy and outlining, and of course doing the research. And those are all things you need to learn how to do. But then how do you actually piece that all together into a successful long form promo? And so that's what this class is going to be showing you. And I'm super excited about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the things, especially as we've, I've worked with you since the beginning of the year, just kind of just like seeing some of these things kind of come to life a little bit more, and kind of seeing that structure and how you kind of fit it all together is really valuable to, obviously take your copywriting skills to the next level, because you can more strategically think about your promo and how you can kind of use some of these things that other promos are using, but also kind of just adapting it to whatever you're doing. So,
right. No, I agree. So I'm ready to take any questions that people have from the call. You can unmute yourself. You can go on video. You don't have to be shy. Or you can just type it in the chat.
I'd say when you, especially like, can you maybe go through some of the copywriters that you really followed? I know we've talked about Clayton, but like who else have you kind of admired along the way and kind of studied and kind of brought that into your expertise along the way, especially as you think about some of those other controls outside of what you've done?
Well, some of my favorite copywriters have passed away. I mean, it's really sad. Obviously, Clayton Makepeace is somebody that, I really admire his copy, and anything he's even written about copywriting is just incredibly valuable. And you can find it, like if you go to Total Makepeace, totalpackage.com, I believe, Makepeace Total Package, you can still find a lot of that stuff. But I can always tell a Clayton promo, one that he's written has got a certain energy. It's got this, really great at like, really emotional copy. It's very hard hitting. So I do admire his copywriting quite a lot. The late Jim Rutz was also somebody who, he's kind of person that, I mean, sometimes he would just take a huge risk and it just wouldn't work, right? But then he would do it and it would just be this massive success. Like his Read This or Die promo that he wrote for Alternatives. That I think brought in like at least 100,000 paid subscribers for a health newsletter. And I think it more than doubled their circulation, which they also had a back-end supplement business. So he basically helped create a whole, probably at least $100 million business right there with his promo. So those are two of my favorite, and they're both dead. But like other copywriters that I really admire, I really admire the limited amount of copy I've seen from Dan Ferrari. We had him in on our group call, and, I love his Genesis promo. Paris Lampropoulos is somebody that I've been lucky enough to have copy chief me on some of my projects. He copy chiefs everybody who works on anything for SoundView or Advanced Bionutritionals. And he doesn't really write copy anymore, but he's a brilliant copywriter. And what I've really learned from him is just, how to really write well, like in a flow that helps people, slide through that grease chute, and not get tripped up and keep them reading. And it's so important because, you've got so many things that could stop somebody from reading your copy that you can't control. Like somebody rings the doorbell or they get a phone call or the dog starts barking or whatever. And you're just trying to keep them hooked in as much as possible with compelling copy. So you don't want to trip them up with, oh, wait, that didn't make sense, or now I'm lost, or, that, was a kind of a rough transition. I don't know what you're talking about now or whatever, where they get stuck on something like trying to figure it out and then you've lost them. So I would just say those are some of my favorite copywriters, and I'm sure I'm forgetting some, but Carlene, how could I forget? Carlene Anglais-Cole, who's a very good longtime friend. She's an amazing copywriter, and I don't know where she gets her headlines. They just make me laugh sometimes. But she's extremely effective, and she takes a very high energy approach to her copy as well. You can tell that she was mentored by Clayton.
Gotcha. I mean, talk about some of your headlines as well. Are you had a couple of the headlines where you brought in Emerald as part of those.
Yeah.
Like, how do you kind of think about bringing in some of those kind of outside things that you saw and kind of bring them to life a little bit more in your headline and your lead?
So again, it's all about those connections you make with things that are kind of tangential. And at the time that I wrote that promo, that was maybe 6 or 8 years ago. This was a headline test that I did on the memory supplement promo. And actually now I think it was bam, you got your memory back or something like that. Go from forgetful and spacey to whatever, it's kind of showing a transformation in the subhead part of the headline. But that was, the whole Emerald thing was kind of big, bam, and just the idea of just like an instantaneous improvement, like when you hear bam, that's what you think of. It's like something just happened suddenly and hopefully a good something. So that's how I came up with that idea for that headline.
That's
somebody had asked, talk about the results. Results will vary every time like a promo is mailed or, run online, but the controls that I've written and the ones that I'll be featuring in this promo program are all, in very competitive markets. Like I've gone up against copywriters that, or promos that have done very well, and I've had to beat them. And so, I can't really share the exact results, but they're all highly profitable. My clients would not continue to mail my control if they weren't at least. It depends on what their objective is. But supplements, sometimes they just want to break even. If they can make 20% more, on profit, that's great. But, they're looking at the consumable product that they can get repeat orders on. And then I've written promos that, like, especially if it depends on the kind of offer too. Like most time it's a hard offer where it's cash with order. With like Boardroom and other types of, direct marketers, they tend to use soft offers. So, you usually want to get like anywhere from 5 to 8% response, which sounds really high, but that's like, you're not sending in any money. You're getting, it's like a bill me type offer. So, so results really are different depending on the type of offer and the type of market.
We've come to the top of the hour. So,
okay. Well, I want to just thank everybody for coming. And Brian, I really thank you for doing this interview. And I hope people found it helpful, and I will be sharing it because I know I heard from a lot of people who are like, oh, I'm not able to make it at 2:00. And Carolyn says it's been valuable. Thank you, Carolyn, for being here. And I will be sharing with everybody and appreciate your time.
Thanks, Kim.
Okay. Take care.